Okay, good reminder, reminder to myself to do that. Um, and I think you can all see my slides now, hopefully. Let me get the chat on so I can see all of you. Um, all right. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, maybe say who you are and your institution, maybe other things if you'd like to introduce yourself. Um, And also feel free to enter your questions for me at any time. I'm going to wait until the end to answer all the questions. There were some that were submitted beforehand as well. So either go ahead and put them in the chat, or you can go ahead and save them until the end and verbalize them as well. And so while you're in the chat and while I am introducing myself, why don't you also tell everyone the first one or two things that come to mind when you think of the phrase broader impacts? And we'll see what kind of variety we'll get from everybody if I can find the chat again. So to let you know a little bit about myself, Amy Myrbo. I am an independent consultant in Minneapolis. I was part of the University of Minnesota for a long time. That's where I did my PhD in geology, but I was also an English major as an undergrad. So I sort of have um, both the science and the humanities side of things. While at the University of Minnesota, I helped build and develop a couple of National Science Foundation funded facilities for coring and drilling sediments from the bottoms of lakes. And so during that time, I did a lot of grant writing and outreach. And about 12, 13 years ago, started getting pretty heavily involved in diversity work as well, and especially working with tribal communities, youth, and resource managers on looking at landscapes and cores from lakes on reservations and in important places to develop records of past human impacts. Um, and in 2019, I left academia to be an independent consultant, so now I'm kind of academic adjacent, and to to do grant writing, evaluation, broader impacts consultation, basically to help scientists get more grants. And so if I can find the chat, which I don't know that I can, I'm trying to share my screen, and oh, there it is. Okay, what have we got? Broader impacts makes me think of measurable impact, often on underrepresented populations in the sciences, and that is one of the biggest things that I work for. Benefits to society, educational objectives coming out of or related to a project, and that's a good point. Another paleolimnologist. Educational application of research, representation of diverse and underrepresented groups, societal benefits, helping to establish human infrastructure associated with science, and those are all great. And it turns out that there are really just two merit review criteria. And if you've submitted an NSF proposal, you know that there's intellectual merit, which is what you have been trained to do mostly, the science part, how your science is going to advance the field and push things forward. But there's also this component called broader impacts, and that is all about desirable societal outcomes. And so why do we care about these desired outcomes? Especially because you probably have not been trained in anything related to broader impacts in any comparable degree to which you have been trained in your intellectual merit piece, right? You've spent X number of years in getting an education and practicing science, but probably not nearly that much time, if any, being educated in and practicing broader impacts activities. But We do it because, of course, it's required. It's really the right thing to do. There is really a moral imperative to reach outside academia, and because we're using federal funds, so we want to be giving back to taxpayers. And because it's one of the two criteria for review, it could be somewhere up to half of your points for the proposal. Broader impacts can really make or break a proposal. It's one of the ways that can be used as sort of a tiebreaker to rank equally competitive proposals against each other. So a proposal that is really excellent in terms of intellectual merit, if it has kind of so-so broader impacts, it might not be as competitive as one that's really got good broader impacts. And if it has terrible broader impacts, that can make it unfundable, even if the intellectual merit is really exceptional. And so you all put a bunch of broader impacts activities, ideas in the chat. Let's look at some of the guidance from NSF. So this is, excuse me, this is a list that is sort of tucked away deep in the bowels of the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide, the PAPPG, which, along with the solicitation for the particular program you're going for, is sort of your Bible that you're going to be taking advantage of and rereading and taking notes on as you're preparing your proposal. So here is an example, and this is not intended by NSF to be an exhaustive list of the activities that could be considered as broader impacts. But this is a great set of examples. So, for example, broadening participation, full participation of people who are currently underrepresented in the sciences, in STEM, in your field, etc. Improved STEM education and educator development at any level. So this could be classroom education, which we call formal education. It could be informal education, things like museums, documentaries, other kinds of outreach events, things like that are sort of public outside the classroom education. Increased public scientific literacy and public engagement with science. And this could be some of those same types of outreach activities, ways of getting the public more involved in their, say, local issues that have to do with science, things like that. Improved well-being of individuals in society. This seems kind of lofty as a goal, but is certainly something that a lot of our projects as scientists do sort of automatically, right? If you are studying natural hazards, if you are studying the health of lakes or the oceans, if you are studying, I don't know, various engineering things, there are lots of ways in which your science may be improving the well-being of individuals in society. Development of a diverse, globally competitive STEM workforce. So that workforce development piece is really about training of undergraduates, graduates. It could be, basically anyone. It could be people who are in the workforce already, in the STEM workforce. Partnerships between academia, industry, and others. One of the partnerships, I like to think about is tribal organizations, tribal governments, other kinds of agencies, nonprofits, anything that is sort of outside of academia, industry, if that's appropriate to your field. Improved national security and increased economic competitiveness of the U.S. A new one that appeared in the latest version of the PAPPG is the use of science and technology to inform public policy. And I think that one is really, I was really, really happy to see that in there. So that's something that NSF is really taking seriously, is science-informed policy. And then enhanced infrastructure for research and education. So that's maybe you're setting up a new lab or instrument that will be accessible to a lot of scientists, or will advance the field in some way. Maybe it's a cyber infrastructure project that is a database or a tool, and maybe it's human infrastructure, right? More workforce, more trained people. Okay, and so this is a great list. I use it, the fact that it's a list provided by NSF doesn't mean that you have to choose just one. It doesn't mean you have to do all of those things, right? But I like using it to brainstorm, to sort of think like, well, what aspects of the project fit into these categories, or are there things that I'm not thinking of? So sort of as an organizer and a reminder. And so um, there are so many possibilities with broader impacts from this list. How do you choose, and how do you start building your own broader impacts program? So a few of my sort of high level recommendations are the following. The first is to make sure that the activities you are choosing align with your strengths, right? So if you are an educator, if you love education, an education related thing would be good, but making sure that they also align with your values. And what do I mean by this? I'm talking about core values, and the first thing to do is to sort of identify what your values are. And I'll share a link, I think it's in this next slide, to a little exercise that I've stolen and sort of modified. But so an example list of values, and you might go through this. What the exercise suggests is that you go through and choose the ones that are most meaningful to you, that you really feel are your values, and then try to narrow it down to only two, right? And really, really understand what things are most important to you. And the value of doing this for broader impacts is that it will help you understand what activities you will continue to work on, that you will be happiest with, that you will be most passionate about, for example. So diversity is, I think, one of my core values, and thinking about it, I will be a lot happier working on a project that does some intervention with underrepresented minoritized students than I would be with the same program that worked for privileged white students, even though everything else was the same. And so again, I'll share these slides so you have that link if you want to take a look and go a little bit further into this activity. My next recommendation is that you leverage existing programs. And if anybody who knows me knows that leverage is about my favorite word in grant writing. It means really finding programs that exist and throwing your weight behind them rather than reinventing the wheel. So, for example, you might, instead of starting your own STEM summer camp for middle school students, you might look for something that already exists that is that, and you provide some content. You put some money into your proposal for it. You devote some time, so you're meaningfully engaged in that project. And that way you're being more efficient. You are leveraging money and effort that's already being spent. You are using an infrastructure and people who are experts, things that already exist. And so you can really focus on the things that are your strengths, as well as learning from the people who are experts who are sort of there before you. Okay. Building relationships for the long term. So you probably know that you probably shouldn't call up your local school a week before your proposal deadline and ask them for a letter of collaboration for something that you made up and wrote into the proposal without talking to them. You should be talking to them a lot earlier, and really talking to them in terms of building that relationship rather than just asking them to give you a letter, right? You don't want to be just checking a box. You want to be doing something authentic where you are developing an idea together. Maybe asking, you can think about it as asking what they might need, because they know better than you what kind of program will work in their kind of system. So what their needs are and how your talents and resources might match those needs, right? And I think another important thing to think about is how don't think about it as just, it's for this proposal, right? Think of it as for this proposal, for your next NSF proposal, maybe for, the next 10 years of your NSF proposals, that you're building a relationship with a school that, or whatever, or kind of organization that you can go back to, you can continue to build a collaborative relationship, and you can get them involved at every time that you're writing a proposal. So your broader impacts in that way will just get better and better. And then don't forget anything that's sort of an automatic broader impact. For example, maybe you're a member of a group that's underrepresented in the sciences. Make sure to mention that, or maybe one or more of your students are. The workforce development piece, anytime you are training a graduate student or an undergraduate in STEM, that counts as workforce development. And even teaching, even in a general ed class, not just with research and mentoring, but you're training people to be more critical thinkers. Right? There are those benefits. Making the world a better place. I mentioned, the societal benefits of individuals, improving the well-being of individuals in society, and how your own science might benefit people and improve people's well-being. And there may be others that are sort of this automatic, sort of the broader impacts that just accrue from your project as it is. Some of the questions that I get a lot. One is, how big should I go, or how many broader impacts should I have in my project? I would say that you should be ambitious. It should be, your broader impact should be big enough to achieve outcomes. But as it says in the career solicitation, that guidance is that sort of the education component, or whatever broader impacts you're doing, should not be an extra burden, should not be something that you can't actually achieve, right? Your primary activity is research. You have a lot of stuff to do, so you don't want to promise things that are going to be sort of above and beyond what your capacity is. So I think reviewers and panelists can really tell when people are overpromising, right? People will say this doesn't seem realistic in the time that a typical faculty member has. But if you can justify it, if you can say, I'm getting a course release to be able to do this, or I'm getting summer salary to be able to do this, and this is how it's going to work. If you can justify it, then by all means, go big. It should be appropriately funded. So NSF and reviewers and panelists know that people can't work for free. They can't get places without travel funding. And so make sure that you put in money to pay for the broader impacts activities that you're proposing. That could be, paying stipends to teachers or students, any number of things, but make sure that you're putting in some money. How much money? Sometimes we say maybe 10% of your direct costs budget should be for broader impacts. Some people say 20%. It kind of depends on the proposal and what you can do. So, for example, with a $300,000 proposal, so you figure about a third of that is the overhead or indirect costs for your institution, and so the rest is your direct costs. So $200,000, and take 10% of that. So you should at least have about about $20,000 committed to your broader impacts. And so you can scale that with your proposal budget. Some people ask about how much space as well. Maybe a page for your broader impacts. Again, more if it's the kind of proposal that leans a little bit more heavily on that. And my preference, at least, is to not leave it until the very end of the proposal, because it does really indicate your priorities. So it's nice to see broader impacts discussed a little bit higher up in the proposal, and especially in career, that education component and to a degree the broader impacts need to be very integrated into your research.
Come on.
And
No,
they
yeah.
also should be cohesive, right? So you shouldn't have just a laundry list of things that you're saying that you're going to do, right? A little bit from here, one from column A, I'm going to do this over here, right? Try to at least have a thread or an envelope that ties everything together. Like, I am, all of my stuff is going to be about engaging people in, you know, citizen science or something like that. And I'm going to do these various activities that support that. So have some thread that ties everything together. Another question is, do the broader impacts have to be about my science? So if you have, if your science is somewhat esoteric and you you're thinking like, well, I'm never going to be able to go into a sixth grade classroom and explain, why quantum tunneling is important in something, something. The broader impacts don't have to be specifically focused on the science of the proposal. They can be um, they can be something that you add on that isn't necessarily, the content doesn't necessarily have to be your science. And the PAPPG says this, blah blah blah. I won't all read it, but it can be supported by, but complementary to the project. Do the broader impacts need to be something novel? No. The project activities may be based on previously established and or innovative methods, but in either case must be well justified. I wanted to spend a minute on the career education component. I know that it's a little confusing based on some of the questions that I received beforehand about like how the education component and the broader impacts are different or overlapping or whatever. And I'll answer that a little bit later. The the broader impacts, well, I'll get to that in a minute. One of the things that I heard on an NSF webinar a few weeks ago is, they really, really, really emphasized that the research and education components should complement each other. They should inform each other. They should strengthen each other. And one of the things that they said specifically, this is NSF program officers, said that most faculty succeed in explaining how their research informs their teaching. That's pretty easy. But what is a heavier lift for proposers is explaining how their teaching informs their research. And I think that's really interesting, and it is hard. They said, think about what you learn from your students, how how pedagogical literature you might take those models and inform and use them to inform your research as well. So that's something to make sure that you think about when you're writing your career proposal. So just a couple excerpts from the career solicitation. First is, that the education component, it doesn't have to be just classroom education, and it certainly doesn't have to be just undergrad classroom education, right? The education component may be in a broad range of areas and may be directed to any level. So that means it could be informal ed, it could be outside the classroom, outreach events, citizen science, it could be, documentary filmmaking, museum work, things like that. It doesn't have to be formal ed. And it can be directed to any level. So this could be, kindergartners, this could be seniors, right? We say from K to gray, right? So your education component could be directed toward OSHR lifelong learners or veterans or, adults as well as students. The activities in your education should be consistent with research and best practices in curriculum, pedagogy, and evaluation. And so this means you have to dig into the literature, right? You need to, or partner with somebody who has dug into the literature, right? Somebody who is a knowledge generation or education research specialist, just to make sure that you're or an evaluator um, that your education activities, what you're proposing, is evidence-based, right? That there is some research that shows that these interventions will work, or based on literature. Um, and then that you can build on or otherwise meaningfully participate in existing NSF-supported activities or other educational projects ongoing on campus. So this goes back to leveraging existing programs, whether they're NSF-supported, so maybe you have a colleague in your department who has a cool outreach project that they're doing or education project that they're doing as part of their career work. Partner with them on that, right? Put some money and again, your effort behind it to make their program more robust, right? Because they're ahead, they've got some experience, and this is a program potentially that you could collaborate in. Same thing with anything going on your campus. You probably should keep it to your campus because of the importance in the career solicitation in the career program that your work aligns very well with the goals of your department and your institution. I'll say a few words about assessment or evaluation. This is my emphasis, but successful applicants will propose creative, effective research and education plans, along with strategies for assessing those components. So I highlighted the "and" here because this indicates that not only the education component should be evaluated or assessed. So people use assessment and evaluation interchangeably often. And for our purposes, they are pretty much the same in this case. But not just the education should be assessed, but the research should be assessed as well. And so what do we mean by evaluation and assessment? So at sort of its most basic, it's about how you'll know whether you've succeeded, right? And that seems kind of straightforward, but if you unpack it a little bit, first you've got to define what you mean by, it, right? What is it that you're actually doing? What are the steps that you're doing? And what is the final outcome supposed to be? And what would success look like? And how would you measure that success? And what are the milestones that would be on the road to that success? What are the metrics by which you would measure that success? And how do you collect that data? Right? So that's sort of the nuts and bolts of evaluation or assessment. And you can kind of see how this could be applied to both, education, like are students learning what they should be learning, or are they graduating from college in 4 years or whatever because of this intervention, right? There's the cause and effect issue also, but you can also apply it to your research. I intend to, accomplish this, but it's not just something like I will publish these papers, but collecting certain data, answering hypotheses, things like that. And so in the solicitation, it says that you can use career funds to hire an evaluator, and this could be somebody from inside your institution as long as they're not in your chain of command, right? You can't be their boss if they are considered an external evaluator. Or it could be somebody from outside your institution, independent person, or somebody from a different university. I think that carefully reasoned self-evaluation may also be sufficient. And what do I mean by that? So I will share, and I think there's the link. There is something that's it's about 10 years old now, but called the NSF User-Friendly Guide for Project Evaluation. There's a chapter in it that takes you through sort of how to build a theory of change and a logic model, and how to put together an evaluation plan. As long as you build in time for yourself to collect and analyze the data, and build in, these metrics and things, you could be collecting and analyzing this data yourself. So there's nothing in the career solicitation that requires that you have an external evaluator. There are some NSF programs that require that the evaluator has to be external, but this is something that you potentially could do yourself if you have the time. Okay, so we're nearing the end here. If you are interested in talking, in getting more help with your career proposal or any other proposal, you can contact me. I do a number of different things, including coaching for career proposals. I can be an external evaluator. I can also help you write or write for you do-it-yourself evaluation plans like I just talked about. Um, I do development and execution of broader impacts activities, editing and what I call red team review, or what's called red team review of proposals, where I pretend that I'm a reviewer who's had a really, really bad day, and we've all had those, where you think, what is going on with this person? But to be like aggressively critical, to try to poke holes in your proposal. So sort of this pre-review to strengthen it before you submit it. Building capacity, right? I try to, with everybody that I work with, I try to teach them or build their capacity so that they don't have to hire me again, right? To be able to give you the tools to develop your own broader impacts and evaluation and strengthening your grant proposal and more. If so, the folks I'm working with this season for career, it's a range between about $1,000 and $3,000 for some mix and match of these activities, depending on what they need. Um, People ask where you get that money. Do you have to pay out of your pocket? No. You may have startup, you may have indirect cost recovery, but I would first ask your department and your college whether they have money for this kind of professional development or hiring a grant writer, because it's a pretty small investment for an institution to put in to get a really big payoff in terms of those indirect costs that come back to them. Really about a third of your budget will go directly to your institution. And so they may be able to put in a few $1,000s to increase their chances of getting a big proposal in these pretty prestigious career proposals. So I'm going to stop sharing and see what people, the whole time I was thinking, am I even on screen? Because all I could see was my slides. But I would love to take any questions. I will take, I have a few that people submitted before, but let's see if anybody wants to ask any questions right now. And you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away. Okay, so there's one in the chat. How many pages of broader impacts do you suggest for the career proposal? So I feel like, so let me go back to what somebody had asked about the differentiating the broader impacts from the education component. In the career proposal, the education component has to be really, really big. I mean, not like practically sub-equal, right? More almost equal to your research, and they have to be very, very integrated. The broader impacts piece is what is beyond that. So what you could do would be to have your whole proposal write about your education and your research and integrate those, and then you could have maybe a half page to a page that explains, that sort of lists out your broader impact. So including that, the education and maybe those individual pieces of that, like this is improving STEM education because it's going to generate knowledge about this particular type of teaching or this particular kind of curriculum. But it's also workforce development because we are training students to be STEM workers. And also saying, I am a woman, I'm underrepresented in the geosciences. And then any of the other broader impacts activities that you might be doing that you're sort of adding on, right? Or how your project enhances diversity, for example. So I would say, that the education piece probably needs to be several pages worth. I would say at least a third of your proposal. I wouldn't take that completely, to heart, but it needs to be very, very major. And then the broader impacts can be a little bit of a sort of a recap, right? You can write about all the different ways, all these different broader impacts. And I think that list that I showed you is a great way to remind yourself of what those all might be. Does that clarify things for people about the broader impacts versus education? Right. Another good question. Um, if your education plan already includes outreach in diverse communities, do you need to do more for broader impacts? I don't think so. I think, it doesn't, no. I think that sounds like, that hits a few boxes as long as you can, as long as it feels to you big enough, to, it's diverse communities, it's outreach, it's education. But I don't think you need to, to add things on after that. Let's see, a couple of questions that were submitted earlier. So what are the most important services or items to include in the assessment component of the budget? So I'll say a little bit. So I think the budget is, so again, a rule of thumb is another, maybe 5 to 10% of the value of the direct costs of the proposal would be another evaluation piece. That's a chunk of change. And it really depends on what, on the intensity of the evaluation effort. One of the ways that you can decrease that cost or keep that manageable is by doing more of the data collection yourself, or having having a student or somebody doing the data collection. So maybe that might be, sending out a survey, collating responses, doing some data cleanup, and then passing and anonymizing it, for example, and then passing that information to an external evaluator. So if it was me, that would take a lot of load off my plate. That I would be more doing the analysis than the data collection. Students can learn how to code qualitative data and things like that. And so there are ways to sort of balance that in a way that keeps a little bit more money in your own budget rather than in that consultant piece. But I think the most important piece to include in the assessment is that literature basis, right? You really need to be evidence-based. So for whatever intervention or whatever program you are planning to do, make sure that there is some, that there's a literature basis for what you plan to do. Even if it's, there's not literature on exactly what you want to do, maybe something that's been done in another field or in another type of institution, and then you're trying to put that activity into a new kind of setting. There could be a literature basis for that, and I think that's important. I think it's important. It's not a big thing, but mentioning that you will go for institutional review board review, so IRB. If you haven't run into that, it's each institution has a little bit of their own way of, it's protecting human subjects mainly. And so any program where you're going to be doing surveys or observing or doing something that will be data collection, especially for publication or for dissemination, you need to have a review of your protocols and get those approved or counted as exempt by your institution's IRB. Let's see. One from the chat. Any suggestions for developing your story if you do very multidisciplinary research, i.e. collaboration with geology and chemistry, that's not particularly related to your home department, physics? And I think that's a little bit challenging just because of the way that the career, it really needs to be situated and aligned with the goals of your institution and your department. That may be a good conversation to have, and I think you should have conversations pretty early with your department chair because of that letter that's required, that needs to say something about how your career proposal aligns with departmental goals. I mean, you must have a story, and I think even just writing that out and trying to explain it to yourself, and maybe you've tried to do that, but um, how did you get here? How does it align? Um, maybe your home department doesn't only care about physics, right? Maybe it's a little bit broader STEM, and these things can be pulled in. So that's a tough question, but I'm happy to talk about it more offline if you wanna talk to me. Can the budget for education and broader impacts include money for a graduate student in history or philosophy of science or science education? Would this be frowned upon? My individual take is that that would be a really cool thing to do. I think that I would recommend, and again, just like talking to your department chair, it's maybe even more important to talk to your program officer, to contact, just don't be a stranger to them. One thing that I really highly recommend, and everybody from NSF who I've talked to in the last many months has suggested that you talk to them, but that you send a one-pager, right? And ideally do this at least 6 weeks before the proposal deadline. So that's going to be coming up for your end of July career deadline. That you should, write a one-pager. It could be your project summary. It could be something like that, but sort of your pitch, and especially include the specifics that you most want, most have questions about. Things like, a graduate student in history or philosophy of science or science education, right? Ask them whether that would be appropriate, but don't just ask them that sort of contextless. Explain to them how it would fit in, right? How you would justify that, why you want to do it, because then I think you'll get a lot better. Feedback about whether they think that's, how they think that would really fit in. But I think anything we can do to get, to cross over the artificial boundaries between the sciences and, the humanities, is extremely valuable. And another thing I guess I'll say about that is that would have really mutual benefits. So not only for, the student would benefit from having that funding and that connection, that project probably, but you would also benefit from, and others in your department might benefit from, having that expertise be sort of authentically in your department with some context. So that mutual benefit is something that I would really emphasize. Let's see. Another question previously submitted. If I have an assessment collaborator on the proposal, can I put some salary compensation in the budget for that collaborator, even though career proposals are meant to focus on the PI? So yes, that it says it's hidden somewhere in the solicitation that yes, you can include money for a consultant, or whatever collaborator. You can include money for that assessment person. I think that's true of other collaborators too. As they mentioned, the career proposals are really single PI, right? You don't have any co-PIs, you don't have, but everybody has collaborators, right? We all work in teams. And so as long as it's justified, I think that you can put in some funding for collaborators. But again, something to potentially talk to a program officer about your specific case and justify it again. How do panels view budget items specifically for broader impacts and evaluation? So I covered this a little bit. You really need to put in the money. right? People, that's one of the biggest things that I think people complain about when in panels is this person, has these great broader impacts, but there's no money in the budget for it. So how are you going to do it, right? So you have to fund them. I actually have been involved in a couple of pretty big proposals where NSF has, we've gotten funded, and then NSF has asked the team to cut 10% from their total budget and said explicitly not to cut, don't touch the broader impacts or the evaluation, right? So they have to do it. They want to make sure that that those things don't get cut even proportionally with the rest of the proposal. And I've had one of the program officers said, like, they should really have more support. So, don't be shy about including that money. But I know that sometimes it's a choice between, broader impacts and a student or something like that. So it's tough because money is certainly limited. Let's see, this one was about the overlapping of the broader impacts and the evaluation. How to develop good metrics for assessment of education plan and broader impacts. And I think if you look, especially in chapter 3 of that user-friendly guide to project evaluation, that is a really great place to think about your metrics. Let's see. Do you have a general rule of thumb for either space of the proposal and space in the budget to allocate to broader impacts and evaluation? I talked about this a little bit, but I think that that in the career proposal, since you'll be talking so much about education, the broader impacts piece can be a chunk that is more of a sort of a roundup, right? Your broader impacts, since there has to be a section called broader impacts, right? That's required. It has to be named. It's a good idea, I think, maybe not even to introduce new things necessarily in there, but to use it as sort of like a summary, a recap of all of the wonderful broader impacts that are going to accrue from your project. And the evaluation, it's really tough. There are some proposals where there's a whole separate evaluation document that's like 3 pages long, and you've got all this space to actually explain things. In a career proposal, it's pretty tough. You maybe can squeeze out a half a page, something like that. But again, it has to be. It's more about the content than about the length. But I would say definitely allow a half a page for the evaluation and that broader impact statement, as well as the extensive discussion of your education plan. That's it for previously submitted questions. Does anybody else have, I want to be respectful of everybody's time and let you go at the top of the hour, but other questions? All right, well, you have my, yeah, you're welcome. You have my email address. If you have follow-up questions, if you want to talk more about developing your project, just let me know. And otherwise, I wish you all the best with the stress of preparing and submitting and waiting. And as always, if you don't get it this time, really think about resubmitting. And if you are at the stage where you are no longer eligible for a career, submit it as a regular proposal, right? It's going to be, it's a strong proposal because it's a big career proposal. Adapt it for a regular proposal. So I guess that's my last thought. All right. Thanks so much for your attention. I'll send out the recording whenever I have it. Thanks.